So Alabama just detained 82 truckers in coordinated ICE raids, and suddenly the entire trucking industry is acting like they found the root cause of every problem plaguing American highways. Governor Kay Ivey is out here taking victory laps. The Alabama Trucking Association is celebrating, and politicians from Tommy Tuberville to the new Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy are all jumping on the bandwagon. But here's what nobody's asking. Is this actually about safety, or is this just another convenient scapegoat for an industry that refuses to acknowledge its own failures? Let me break down what happened. Starting October 27th, Alabama law enforcement agency partnered with ICE to run what they're calling strike force operations along rural interstate corridors. They inspected commercial vehicles, referred 242 people to ICE for immigration checks, and detained 82 of them. Of those detained, 12 had no driver's license whatsoever, and the rest had out-of-state licenses. Governor Ivey came out swinging, saying Alabama won't look the other way while illegal operators threaten safety and undermine the trucking industry's integrity. Now, the timing here is fascinating because this raid coincides perfectly with the rollout of something called the Trucking Resurgence Action Plan. This blueprint was just released by the Trucking Association Executive Council, which is basically every state trucking association getting together to point fingers at 7 major problems they claim are destroying the industry. CDL integrity, cross-border workforce issues, English language proficiency, fraud schemes, you name it. And wouldn't you know it, immigration enforcement just happens to fit perfectly into their narrative. Here's where this gets interesting. The American Trucking Association has spent years crying about driver shortage. ATA claimed we were short 60,000 drivers in 2024, projected to hit 82,000 by the end of this year, with over 1.2 million new drivers needed over the next decade. They've used the shortage narrative to push for everything from lower training standards to recruiting foreign labor. But now they're suddenly all about enforcement and cracking down on illegal operators. The same industry that was begging for more drivers is now celebrating mass detentions. So which is it? Do we have a driver shortage or don't we? Because here's the reality nobody wants to talk about. We don't have a driver shortage. We have a freight recession. Since 2022, the trucking industry has been underwater. Rates are depressed, load counts are down, and over 39,000 carriers have gone out of business. Yellow Corporation collapsed with 25,000 drivers. If there was truly a shortage, how does that happen? The truth is there are plenty of CDL holders out there. The problem is retention, not recruitment. When you work 70-hour weeks away from home for wages that have not kept pace with inflation, people leave. That's not a labor shortage. That's a working conditions problem. But admitting that would require the industry to look in the mirror. And that's not happening. Instead, they're blaming illegal operators for undercutting wages and compromising safety. Mark Colson from Alabama Trucking said illegal operators exploit regulatory loopholes and undercut hard-working Alabamians. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy claimed that unlicensed drivers and people who got licenses illegally will drive trucks for much lower rates, destroying the economics for compliant carriers. And look, I'm not going to sit here and defend people driving commercial vehicles without proper licenses. That's crazy. If you're behind the wheel of an 80,000-pound truck without a CDL or with a fraudulently obtained license, you're endangering lives. Full stop. But let's not pretend this enforcement action is the silver bullet that's going to fix trucking. Because the same industry celebrating these raids is the one that's been fighting against better wages, opposing reforms to hours of service rules, and resisting improvements to working conditions that might actually retain drivers. Here's what the Trucking Resurgence Plan actually proposes. AI-powered data analysis, integrated databases, enhanced verification systems, stricter English proficiency requirements, overhauling the Motor Carrier Management Information System, and cracking down on ELD manipulation. Most of these are technology solutions that sound impressive, but don't address the fundamental problem. If you pay drivers better, treat them better, and give them reasonable schedules, you won't need to raid immigrant communities to find scapegoats for your capacity problems. And let's talk about the driver shortage myth for a second, because Transportation Secretary Duffy actually called this out, probably without realizing it. When asked about the shortage, he said there are plenty of Americans who want these jobs because they are great paying. But then he blamed foreign drivers for accepting lower rates. So which narrative are we going with? Because if the jobs pay so well, why would anyone accept less? The answer is simple. The jobs don't actually pay that well relative to the demands, and carriers have been using foreign labor and illegal operators as downward pressure on wages for years. Now that the political winds have shifted, they're suddenly shocked. Shocked, I tell you, that illegal operators exist. The freight market tells you everything you need to know. ATA's own tonnage tracker showed the industry contracting through most of 2024. November and December both saw drops. Capacity utilization is low. FTR Transportation Intelligence called 92% truck utilization underwhelming. If there were truly 80,000 missing drivers preventing goods from moving, rates would be skyrocketing and utilization would be maxed out. Instead, we're seeing the opposite. Trucks are sitting idle not because there is nobody to drive them, but because there is nothing to haul. Now here's where it gets even more cynical. The Trump administration just removed nearly 3,000 CDL training providers from the Federal Registry for non-compliance, with another 4,500 on notice. Transportation Secretary Duffy specifically blamed the Biden administration for letting bad actors game the system. So we're cracking down on training mills that produced unqualified drivers while simultaneously lamenting a driver shortage. Make it make sense. And Alabama isn't alone in these enforcement operations. Similar raids happening in Wyoming, Oklahoma, Indiana, and Texas, resulting in dozens more arrests. Indiana saw 146 illegal immigrant truck drivers arrested in Operation Midway Blitz. The pattern is clear. This is a coordinated national effort being sold as a safety initiative, but functioning as a political statement and convenient excuse for the industry's structural problems. What's really happening here is an industry that bet wrong on capacity is now looking for someone to blame. During the pandemic boom, carriers expanded aggressively. New operators flooded the market, but when demand crashed, they were left holding the bag. Instead of acknowledging that overcapacity and poor business decisions created this mess, they're pointing at immigrants and crying about illegal operators undermining the industry. It's easier than admitting that the race to the bottom business model they've been running for decades finally caught up with them. The Alabama Trucking Association says 1 in 13 jobs in Alabama is in trucking, and 86% of communities depend exclusively on trucks to move goods. That's real. Trucking matters. But if it matters that much, why is the industry so hostile to making it a sustainable career? Why are turnover rates above 90% at large carriers? Why do owner-operators go bankrupt at an alarming rates? These aren't questions that get answered by ICE rates. Here's my prediction. These enforcement actions will do absolutely nothing to improve wages, working conditions, or safety outcomes in trucking. What they will do is generate headlines, allow politicians to claim they're tough on immigration, and give the trucking industry a convenient narrative to avoid accountability for its own failures. 6 months from now, we'll still have the same problems. Low rates, high turnover, carriers going bankrupt, and an industry that refuses to invest in its workforce. The real solution isn't rounding up immigrants at weigh stations. It's paying drivers what they are worth. It's treating them like professionals instead of disposable labor. It's fixing detention time so drivers aren't sitting unpaid at warehouses for hours. It's reforming hours of service rules so drivers can actually have something resembling work-life balance. It's increasing broker bonds and cracking down on freight fraud that steals from small carriers. These are the reforms that would create a trucking resurgence, but they require the industry to spend money and give up control, so they're not happening. Instead, we get performative enforcement and a 7-point action plan that focuses on everything except the actual problem. CDL integrity? Sure, let's fix that. But maybe also fix the fact that drivers are quitting in droves because the job is miserable. Cross-border workforce integrity? Great, but how about addressing wage theft and forced dispatch practices? English language proficiency? Important, but not as important as making the profession attractive enough that you don't need to scrape the bottom of the barrel for warm bodies. Alabama detained 82 truckers and everyone's celebrating. But ask yourself this: are American roads any safer today than they were 2 months ago? And drivers making more money? Are carriers treating their workforce better? The answer to all three is no. This is political theater dressed up as a public safety, and the only people benefiting are politicians and industry executives who get to avoid tough questions about why trucking has become such an unattractive profession that we're debating whether there's too many drivers or not enough. The trucking industry does not need an immigration crackdown. It needs to look itself in the mirror and admit that decades of squeezing labor, cutting corners on compensation, and treating drivers as interchangeable parts created this mess. Until that happens, we're just going to keep seeing the same problems repackaged with different scapegoats. Today, it's illegal operators, tomorrow it'll be something else, but the fundamental dysfunction remains, and nobody with power seems interested in fixing this. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an update. Your support lets me keep bringing you more content just like this. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.